Anybody like me who likes the golden age of Hollywood, it's always fascinating to look back and hear about how certain individuals got going, because you often wonder, did they actually want to be that particular persona? When you think about Humphrey Bogart, he was always really in that role, wasn't he, of the menacing detective, the darker side. But I'm sure I was told, well, in fact, Lauren Bacall said that he had a sparkling personality off camera. And, you would have to think, well, it's not necessarily the thing that we would have first thought. What about Edward G. Robinson? Now, Billy Wilder told me that Edward G. really would have excelled in comedy, but people preferred him in those gangster-style roles. Now, this man, of course, a big Hollywood legend that had been around many, many years, was in fact one of the biggest stars in Hollywood in the late 1940s, early 1950s. But Robert Mitchum literally wanted a different career. And today, all thanks to looking back at a wonderful interview, as I often say here on the show, with a former Hollywood legend, well, I found out exactly what Bob's big dream was. As ever, let me explain. Morning, nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. We're in the beautiful rural area of Yorkshire today. As you can see, I'm sat on some compost. What do you mean I look like I should be sat on compost? And overturned in it almost, But there you go. It's a wonderful area, this. We thought we'd get out and about in Yorkshire, give you a little bit of fresh air before we quickly return back to London. Now, as I often say here on the show, Hollywood stars fascinate me because when you think about it, Mickey Rooney often said to me that, well, he was good, and, he did say this, well, he was good at everything, acrobatic, singing, dancing, comedy. He was known as a wonderful triple threat to, of course, movie bosses, seemingly because they felt, that he could simply do everything. Now, what I find fascinating about this particular man, Robert Mitchum, who Mickey actually met when he was an uncredited extra in the Human Comedy way back in the middle 1940s. He said he just knew he had something about him. But at that point, Robert Mitchum wasn't really necessarily thinking about acting as his leading part, simply because, of course, he'd got other things to do, like going into the army, and he really fancied himself, and get this, ladies, as a contemporary to none other than old Blue Eyes himself, Frank Sinatra. In fact, he was, apparently looking at people like Bing Crosby, Perry Como, all of those early crooners that were shifting literally millions of 78 records way back in the 1940s. But could Bob Mitchum sing? Well, according to Mickey Rooney, he had a terrific voice, more in the calypso style. But did you know that, in fact, Robert Mitchum did release not one, but 2 albums, and apparently somewhere in the acetates of CBS Record, there's still more singles, or tracks, should we say, ready to be released. I don't know if anybody can find them. Now, the reason why Robert went down the acting route was simply this, that nobody wanted to invest in him as a singer. They said he wasn't good looking enough, but he looked good in a gangster suit. So for many people, and I think, perhaps maybe I'd love to know what movie you first discovered the brilliant acting of Robert Mitchum. I would say first seen him in the 1954 Western with Marilyn Monroe, River of No Return. Remember that one? Well, that was the sort of first time I'd ever seen him. And when he came over to London to promote that big TV series, do you remember that one? Oh, yes. Well, of course, he'd still managed to cling on to the fame game well into the 90s. Now, what I found fascinating was, as I said, according to Mickey, he tried many different people to see if they would duet with him. The big names of the day, even the latter names, the sort of names like Eddie Fisher. Nobody would. Now, I said, is this because he didn't have a terrific voice? Mickey said, no, that wasn't the case. They apparently were frightened of being upstaged. He was a big movie star. And of course, when you're a big movie star, people want you to stay in one particular lane, in one particular box. Now, Mickey wasn't overkind necessarily about Robert Mitchum. That seemingly is because he too, like so many men, had dated and wooed his former wife, Ava Gardner. But Mickey was gallant enough to say that Robert Mitchum seemingly could have had a secondary career, even in film musicals. But apparently, studio bosses said no. You look like a gangster and a bad guy, and that's the way it's going to stay. Did you know, by the way, that actually Robert Mitchum knew Marilyn Monroe before she became famous, because they were both posing as models for those very small-time magazines in the middle 1940s? hence the reason he got the part opposite her when she made it big at 20th Century Fox. Neil Sean in the very heart of a rural Yorkshire.